Welcome back to the GCN Racing News Show. Coming up this week, the UCI Road World Championships have started in Rwanda, so I'll be looking at the results of the elite time trials and what they could potentially mean for the road races. Is Pogi washed? Absolutely not. I'll also be wrapping up a busy week of racing away from the World Championships with the tours of Luxembourg and Slovakia and a bunch of one-day races in Belgium, France and Italy. This week in the world of racing, we learned that if you've got dirty shades, you can just lick them clean. At least Wout van Aert can. I've never seen that done before in my life. I guess it works, but I don't think I'm going to try it. We also learned that the greatest mountain biker ever to have existed has raced his last race. Congratulations to Nino Schurter. The Swissman won an Olympic gold, 9 overall titles in the UCI World Cup and 10 wins in World Championships amongst many other accolades. He rode his final race in Switzerland yesterday, finishing 24th at the World Series in Lenzerheide. What an amazing career he had. And finally, we learnt that Remco Evenepoel and Marlon Reusser will be sporting the rainbow bands in next year's Pro Time Trials after winning that event at the UCI World Championships yesterday. For Evenepoel, it was his third in a row and it wasn't even a close run affair. Right from the very start, he was well up on all of his rivals. So in just 14 minutes of racing, he was 3/4 of a minute up on Del Toro, Pogačar and Vine, averaging 45 km/h despite the 2.5k climb in that first segment of the race. To be honest, barring accident or mechanical, it was essentially a done deal, even though there was still over half an hour of racing remaining. By the second check, the Belgian was 1:17 ahead of Vine, with Pogačar in third. Incredibly, Evenepoel actually caught Pogačar for 2.5 minutes on that cobbled climb to the finish line. That is not a sight that you see very often. Now, we said in our preview show for the World Championships that Evenepoel should have been the favourite with the bookmakers. He wasn't, and that's because he's rarely been beaten in a standalone time trial over the last few years. In fact, the last one that he didn't win was the Chrono des Nations in France 2 years ago, where Josh Tarling got the better of him. When he's fresh and in a time trial that's not up a mountain, he is very, very hard to beat. Statistically, he's not yet the best male time trialist the world has ever seen, but at the rate he's ticking the big ones off, he will be soon. Were he to win again this time next year in Montreal, and you wouldn't bet against it, he'd be the first rider in history to have won 4 consecutive World ITT titles. Now, his average speed yesterday, despite it being the hilliest World Championships in over 20 years, was a shade under 49 km/h. That is absolutely crazy. The sort of speed most top riders would have been happy with in a flat TT of that length just a few years ago. It was Jay Vine of Australia who took a very well-deserved silver medal. He was clearly on great form, wasn't he? We saw that at the Worlds in both the mountains and the individual time trial. And so the biggest surprise on the day was the bronze medal. Massive congratulations to Ilan van Wilder, who gave Belgium a second medal on the day. That was an incredible ride. He kept Pogačar off the podium by just under 2 seconds, and it really came out of the blue, or at least it did for me. That was the first time that Van Wilder has ever finished in the top 3 of a professional level individual time trial, and he did it at the World Championships. I mean, he's had some decent results in that discipline, but certainly nothing that would suggest he could ride to a medal at the World Champs. One thing that we can conclude from yesterday is that Van Wilder is going to be a very good lieutenant to Evenepoel at the road race this coming Sunday. But what else can we take away from it? Well, personally, I wouldn't say my opinion on how Sunday will unfold has changed much at all. Did Pogačar underperform yesterday? Well, compared to his individual time trials and Grand Tours, yes. But compared to his previous performances at the World Championships in the time trial, no. His best result before yesterday was 6th in Australia 3 years ago. He didn't do the individual time trial last year, but in 2023, after finishing 3rd in the road race behind Van der Poel and Van Aert, he came 21st in the time trial, losing over 3 minutes to Evenepoel on that occasion. I just think personally that those two riders, Evenepoel and Pogačar, have differing abilities in the different disciplines, and therefore their focus on the lead up to this championships is not going to be the same. I'm not saying that Pogačar would have beaten Evenepoel had he prepared more specifically for the time trial. He wouldn't have. I'm just saying that finishing 4th is not a sign that he won't have it all his own way this coming Sunday. And actually, on tomorrow's GCN show, we're going to discuss what makes a true great of the sport, because there's a lot more to it than first meets the eye. It's certainly not all about numbers. So for Evenepoel, it's another box tick, that World Championships, and there's no doubt it's going to give him enormous confidence for the road race. That said, a 265-kilometre race with 5,500 metres of climbing is a very different beast to a 50-minute time trial, especially if you've spent a good portion of your preparation time focusing on the latter. I don't know if he has, but I'd have thought he had. And that might take away from his ability to challenge the very best over a 6-hour very hilly race. I hope he does, and he's done it before obviously, at the Olympic Games last year on what was an equally long road race. I can't wait to find out. Let me know your thoughts at home. Has the men's individual time trial changed your opinion on how Sunday's going to unfold? Let me know in the comment section just down below. Just before I move on to the women's race, I'll do the due diligence of naming the rest of the top 10 in the men's, as they all put in good rides on the day. Isaac Del Toro of Mexico finished 5th. He too was just a few seconds from the podium on the day. Andreas Leknesson was 6th for Norway, Luke Plapp 7th for Australia, Bruno Armorai 8th for France, Taman Arensman 9th for the Netherlands, and Stefan Kung 10th for Switzerland. Okay, on to the women's race, and there the right woman was the bookmakers' favourite, and she also won the race. Massive congratulations to Marlon Reusser. The Swiss rider hadn't raced since pulling out of the Tour de France, so from that point of view her form was a bit of an unknown for anyone not in her entourage, but you also kind of knew she must have been preparing fairly meticulously for this event. She took 2 second places and a third between 2020 and 2022, and given her form this year, it felt right that she'd finally take that elusive gold medal and rainbow jersey. Her margin of victory at the end was large, but it was a much closer race than the men's through the intermediate checks. At the first of those, she was less than a second in front of Demi Vollering, second favourite for the race, but Reusser was clearly just getting warmed up. She flew through the next time check, and by that point, she was almost half a minute ahead of Van der Breggen and Vollering. Van der Breggen did come back at her a little bit after that, reducing the gap by 5 seconds at the last check, but Reusser had more left in the tank. So by the finish, she was 52 seconds in front of Van der Breggen and over a minute in front of Vollering, who took bronze. So no surprise that Reusser and Vollering took medals, but the surprise for me was Van der Breggen taking silver. I mean, on paper it shouldn't come as a huge upset. She's a former world champion in the discipline, but to me she hadn't shown the form over the last few months to suggest that she'd do that well. Happy to see it though. Now before I talk about how it shapes things up for the road race this Saturday, I'll go through the rest of the top 10 in the women's. Brodie Chapman pulled out a great ride for Australia, finishing 4th, just 16 seconds behind Vollering. Apparently her bike didn't turn up until the day before the race either, so it wasn't ideal preparation. Katrine Allerud also did a fantastic ride. She took 5th place for Norway. Then it was Niedermeyer for Germany, Labou for France, Henderson for GB, Dijgert for the USA, and Benito for Spain. Now to highlight Reusser's dominance though, the gap from her to second place in the end was more than from second down to 8th. Okay, what does it mean for the road race on Saturday? Well, I'm going to start with the Dutch team. I mean, you could argue that this puts them in a more dominant position for Saturday, with Van der Breggen looking so good. However, in our preview show, I said I expected Van der Breggen to be fully at the service of Vollering in the road race, but is there now a chance that she can lay claim to being one of the leaders? I mean, the dynamics in the Dutch women's team have been interesting, shall we say, in previous big championships, and it might prove to be again this time around. It's going to be very interesting to see how cohesive they are this weekend and whether they can all work for one rider or even all work to beat the other teams and try to make sure that the Dutch go home with the gold medal, whoever it is that takes it. What about Marlon Reusser then? Well, she's clearly on great form and she has been all year. Importantly for Saturday, her climbing has come on leaps and bounds in 2025 as well. My reservation is that her previous results in one-day races has not been exceptional. She did win Gent-Wevelgem, of course, 2 years ago, and she's finished 3rd at Liège, but she's certainly not a prolific winner or even a prolific podium finisher at the biggest one-day races. Maybe that's about to change though. With Vos and Ferrand-Prévot not taking part in the time trial, we don't know any more about their form, and beyond that, I'm not reading too much into yesterday's time trial. Let me know your thoughts on that one too. Right, I shall move on to other races now and start with the Tour of Luxembourg, which was bookended with 2 fantastic wins for Groupama's Romain Grégoire. On the opening day's uphill finish, he started his sprint way out, but still had enough power to keep Marijn van den Berg at bay, whilst yesterday he went clear in the finale with Ben Healy, attacking him with just over a K to go and holding a small gap all the way to the finish line. Brandon McNulty crossed the line second of the following group, which was more than enough for him to retain the overall lead that he'd taken in the ITT the previous day. Finishing second behind a flying Ethan Hayter propelled the American up 2 places in the GC that day, dislodging Matthias Schellmoser from the top spot. Richard Carapaz also put in a good TT to move up to third, and that was actually how the final general classification looked. Schellmoser himself had won the tough uphill finish on stage 3, whilst the other stage was won by home rider Mathieu Kokelman. The 21-year-old was riding for his national team at the race, but will move up to the main Lotto squad from their development team next year. Before I move on from that race, what a shame that McNulty has chosen not to race the Worlds. He's clearly on fantastic form at the moment. I guess he must have his own reasons for it, but I think we'd all have loved to have seen him race there for the USA. Right, it's not going to take me long to sum up the first 4 stages of the Tour of Slovenia. Paul Magnier of Soudal Quickstep won all of them. Lukas Kubis of Unibet Tietema Rockets finished second in all of them. I'm not sure that's ever happened before in a pro race. Maybe it has, but it must be extremely rare. That brings Magnier up to 10 wins so far in 2025. Only one of them has been at World Tour level, but there's no doubt that the 21-year-old is a super talent who's going to go on to bigger and better things in years to come. Kubis actually put in a great ride on the final stage summit finish, 5.5 kilometres at 6.5%, and he still managed to finish 10th and therefore 6th overall. Very impressive for a sprinter. Up front though, it was Visma Lease Bike versus Jaco Alula, who filled the top 5 spots on the day, and it was the latter who made the first move, launching Paul Double up the road. He was joined by Bart Lemon and almost by Tom Gloag. However, he never quite bridged the gap, and the team would have to settle for second and third, both on the stage and the general classification. Double rode away from Lemon in the closing stages, putting half a minute into him over the final 800 metres. Paul Double's had a very old school journey into the pro ranks, spending years in club or continental level teams before finally moving up to a pro team of Human Powered Health and then Poldi Cometa, and then getting his World Tour chance this year at the age of 28. 29 now, he's taken 3 pro wins this year, and you've got to say he has really earned it. Congratulations to him. Right, on to those one-day races now. I'm going to start with the Championship of Flanders, purely because it was a stacked sprinters field, which we haven't seen for quite some time. One of them, Sam Welsford, was involved in a crash with around 1.5 Ks to go, but although it was pretty chaotic from there to the finish, thankfully everybody stayed upright. Dylan Groenewegen looked like he was going to take the biggest win of his season so far. He looked better than I've seen him in quite a long time, but he couldn't quite keep a flying Jonathan Milan at bay. The Italian powered past him in the last 100 metres. Molière took third, but simply didn't have an answer to Milan, even though he was perfectly positioned on the wheel. Groenewegen also had to settle for second place at the Reusser Peel race yesterday. There he was beaten by Odin Kogut of IPT, the biggest win by far of his career. There was yet more sprinting at the Grand Prix d'Isberg yesterday. Visma Lease Bike took control in the last 2 Ks of the race. Christophe Laporte took to the front with about a K to go, putting in a monster turn. After that, it was Matt Brennan who did the final lead out for Olaf Koy, a lead out that was so strong they ended up finishing 1-2 on the day. Between them, they've now won 23 races this season at pro level. Brennan also finished second at the Super 8 Classic in Belgium the previous day, but not to a teammate on that occasion. The race really confirmed the return to top form of Lotto's Arnaud Delis. So a select group found themselves off the front after things had split up pretty early, with still around 75 Ks to go. Then Delis absolutely beasted it up the Moscow Strat with 40 Ks remaining. I mean, the power he must have been putting through the pedals must have been insane, judging by the grimaces of some of the top tier riders behind him. One of whom was Wout van Aert. He rode at the service of Brennan in the final. Unfortunately for Brennan, he had to close a gap just after 1 K to go, which must have been an effort in itself. He still got very close, but Delis monstered his way to his second win in 4 days. The previous win had come at the Grand Prix de Wallonie. That race finished with a very tough climb in Namur, but Delis had no problems with it and made a really long sprint that seemed to catch the others by surprise. Total Energies Emilien Genier took second, with Gamay of Intermarché in third. And just finally, down in Italy, Christian Scaroni continued his amazing season by taking a dominant solo win at the Giro della Romagna. He rode clear with 16 k's to go, coming to the line almost a minute clear of Kern Farmer's Evenepoel. XDS Astana actually took third on the day as well, with Simone Velasco. Don't forget, incidentally, that you can catch a full season of bike racing live on Discovery Plus or Max. Right, on to transfer news now, and I'll start with one that was announced just too late to make last week's show. Matthew Riccitello, who performed so well at the recent Vuelta, is another rider moving to Decathlon AG2R. He goes there on a 3-year deal. Jaco Alula have signed Amaury Capio of Arkea, whilst Q36.5 confirmed the rumour that Tom Gloag will be moving there from Visma Lease Bike. Visma themselves have signed 23-year-old Italian Davide Pigenzoli from Polti Visit Malta. The Italians had a great season actually, which included 14th overall at the Giro d'Italia. Okay, that is all for this week's show. I'll be back next Monday to wrap up the rest of the UCI World Championships from Rwanda, so I look forward to seeing you all again then. Cheers.